Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
Today on the podcast, we're in Arizona, in Sedona especially. Now, when I first contacted this guy, looking at his email address, it's pretty apparent what is his favorite running event on the track because he's got 1,500 in his email address. Welcome today on the podcast, Jim Mosher. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Matthew. Thanks for having me on today.
Let's tell everybody your origin story. How did you get into running or competitive sports?
In junior high, so I grew up in the Los Angeles area. Yeah, my folks put me on an Episcopal parochial school called Campbell Hall in North Hollywood. It was attached to St. David's Parish. And I know Troop 139 BSA. So I was working on my STAR qualification, marksmanship merit badge. I had the interest in guns, still do. I started playing soccer because I wasn't real good at basketball in seventh grade, but I was okay, sort of midfielder, halfback kind of guy. Not much maneuverability. A lot of parochial schools we played, of course, were Catholic, and they had some really good Hispanic players that just run circles around me. But I had fair endurance, fair turn of speed. We had this intramural track and field meet one day. The longest distance was a 600-yard, not a 660. This is 1963, right? Days of presidential fitness test, and 600 was on that. They had a 440, a 220, and various field events. There was a 220-yard oval chalked out. I ended up winning this thing in 123. I came back and won the 440 in about 57 seconds. Had a little closer competition on that. Got dusted in the 220. Got third at 27 point something. So man's got one's limitations, right? Anyway, it's interesting. The starter was Jay Silverheels. Are you familiar with that name?
Yeah.
So he was Tonto in the Long Rangers. And Campbell Hall had a lot of Hollywood and media people. I wasn't very far from NBC studios and some of the Disney studios. I rubbed shoulders with some of those people. My folks were both working. My dad was over at the Department of Employment Development. He had been an executive for the Boy Scouts of America, which had a lot to do with wives in that program.
Do you know who Jay Silverheels was?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're pulling up to the starting line. Go, oh, it's time. Where's the guy with the mask? Anyway, he's a real gentleman, really nice guy. I think he had a couple of kids at the school or something.
Let me just ask you, let me ask you if you remember what was going through your mind when you won the first race as a team player on the soccer field, and all of a sudden, wow, I just beat everybody.
The lights started to come on. So, wow, it was a really good feeling. And the junior high is a transitional phase. And, you're trying to prove yourself. So athletically, I just finally stood out. Yeah, that helped with the self-esteem and all that. I began to develop a real interest in track and field. My dad had been a hurdler in high school, also a pack a day guy since 15. But so he started taking me to some of the meets, and we went to this meet at Compton College in 1964. It's a mile won by Nyrel Bogerson, dressed by Tommy O'Hara. One of my idols, Bob Day, ran for UCLA, was in the mix. And there was some kid from Wichita, Kansas, finished 8th, got under 4. So that was a motivator. When I got to Notre Dame High School in Sherman Oaks, just up the road, I was one of 100 non-Catholic kids that were enrolled. And this is days Vatican II, so things are starting to open up a little bit with Catholic Church. My dad was raised Catholic. There's a little story there. My mom was Methodist. Anyway, we had to take the religion classes, and you had to go to mass with your Catholic buddies once a week. And that was fine because the Episcopal, when to sit down, so it's pretty much the same for a lot of ways. Yeah, Brothers of Holy Cross ran the institution. There were a lot of them teaching at that point, so it's a mix of lay teachers and brothers. And as you might imagine, discipline was pretty tight. I was 14 when I
You're all
started.
boys?
All boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, all boys school back. I didn't stop the guys who drove from going over to Providence or Louisville or Orlando after hours. I think Notre Dame became co-ed sometime in the early 80s. And a lot of the Catholic schools transitioned. I went out for a cross-country workout September 64, and typically the first day of cross-country workouts in the San Fernando Valley were the first meet, like the two hottest days. It just never fails. I got about 3 miles done. And I think maybe I need to crack down on my books because that's why I'm there. So I didn't go out until track in January. And I was placed in the middle of the workouts, and they stuck me in the B class 1320. You might remember back in the day, they had B and C classes, JB, and you'd run 3 laps instead of 4, and a lap and a half instead of 2. So I got stuck out in the 8th lane on the dirt track at John Burroughs High School. All right. This is back in the days when you would run a full lap and you come off the turn and they had flags. And you could, if you were clear, you could break through the boom. So I'm set at nerves. I just jet out. I'm just going for it. And so I get to the flags and I look to cut over. I've got 3 or 4 seconds on the next guy. Oops. Kind of committed at this point. So I hung on. I went through 65, then hung on through about a 218, and managed to get across at 333. And there was a guy about a second back of me. And the coach was impressed as well. You know what, Mr. Mosher, you're going up to the mile next week. We were back up at our own dirt track in Sherman Oaks, hosting the Burbank Bulldogs. And back in the day, I think Burbank is still in power in the southern section CIF. They had a coach who passed recently, rest his soul, Frank Tell, and he just had team after team after team. Same tactic, but this time it's a cold, early March day. The weather's still variable, not like it is in the East and Midwest, but for us, it's down in the low 50s. So it's cold for us. I take it out, and I'm just trying to go out 62 seconds. We're coming up in half mile. And one Burbank jersey, another Burbank jersey, and a couple of my guys. And it's just, oh my. And I think I struggled in about 507. I was dead last. But what do? You got to pick it up and go. I eventually ended up running 452 that season. Got into the first cycle of CIF in the 1320, ran 330, and then but trained over the summer. I went out for my first cross-country season. Got a really good base. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your first real competitive season then, in terms of if that track was what you stayed on for your whole high school career, what was the training that you did before that summer? And did you have spikes? Did they give you shoes?
I had a pair of spot belts, these clunky black spot belts with white trim that later became Saucony, right? And the cool guys had Adidas or Adidas, Millburns, some other things that the green stripes and the white leather shoes. And everything was fixed at that point. That was the practice shoe and competitive shoe. You know, you try to file those spikes down to keep them sharp through the season. Training shoe, I had, oh gosh, some basic Adidas light blue trainer.
Go ahead and talk about that training. I want to ask you about the Olympics that had just happened in 64, because you had been to track meet. So let's finish about training, then I'll bring that up, or you bring it up. What was going on in the bigger world. Your dad was going to be obviously a fan, 120 yard high hurdler maybe. And then let's talk about that. Okay. Yeah. Training. Your first.
So training was, I didn't really have a concept. I hardly ran on the weekends. So I'd run on a Saturday or Sunday. We lived in Northridge. My folks had bought a house that was way out the northeast end of the San Fernando Valley. It was about 10 miles from Notre Dame. My dad worked in North Hollywood, hopped in his great 403 Peugeot sedan and drove down to school, and he picked me up after workouts. During the week, it was 3 to 4 days. You'd have a couple of track days, and maybe we'd run through the neighborhood around there in Sherman Oaks, Van Nuys, Studio City. Not very far, 4 to 5 miles. After that season, I started reading some books. One was by Ken Doherty, Modern Training for Running. I think he was the coach at Pennsylvania for a while. And then No Bugles, No Drums, with Garth Gilmore and Peter Snell. And First 4 Minutes, Roger Bannister. Okay, those are the books that I read. I got really inspired. I had figured out that I needed to get a little bit more than just during the week. So I started training during the summer, collecting goat head thorns. There were a lot of them in San Fernando. Training, it gets warm here in the summer. So you get up in the 90s, low hundreds at times. So a lot of it was in the evening. That's when I really started to build a base. To go back and talk about 64 Olympics, yeah, that was also an inspiration. Mills, look at Mills. His victory, and then Bob Schul winning 5,000 and Dillinger getting bronze against that field. I got Nearcloth, Chauncey, and a bunch of other horses in that 5,000 race. That was inspiring to see the Americans, break in and something besides 1,500 meters. Of course, girls who only finished, I think, 4th or 5th. And the big race was Snell. And Snell was so dominating back then. It was a real thrill to see him in a race at the Coliseum with Ryan and Grella in 65.
Wow. What were you doing in terms of figuring out what was possible then? You dropped 15 seconds to under 5 minutes sophomore. What were you thinking? What were you and your coach talking about? Was there any vision of what could happen?
My coach in my sophomore year, John Skies, he was actually a junior varsity football coach in the fall, sprinter background. We had a chemistry teacher, a couple of them actually. Larry Walker, who was world-class race walker. He had gone to Notre Dame, was a distance runner. So sometimes he'd run with us. Jerry Farley was the other chemistry teacher that I think had an impact on me. He was very encouraging. He'd been a quarterback. I remember Coach Skies gave me early on, this is 4:32. This is what laps you need to run. I wasn't even close to it at the end of that season. But when I got that base built during fall, I moved from like our 7th man up to our 2nd man. We had a real stud. His name was Mike Wagenbach. He'd been there since 9th grade. He later went on to set records at Valley College, which is just a few blocks from us, and then over to Long Beach. He also ran for Navy, as I did. He was 8:49 for 2 eventually, and 4:04 in the mile like I was. We were always button heads, and he always had the advantage in cross country. I like cross country, but it was like, okay, I have to do this for track. This is going to toughen me up, set the base for track. But I rolled into the 66 track season, and actually my folks finally got a decent pair of Adidas Melbournes, and a pair of Adidas Special shoes to train in. By that time, I was running 40 to 50 miles a week and running longer runs in the weekend. I'd looked at, obviously, reading the books and getting input from other people. To a degree, I was self-coached.
Self-training too? Did you have anybody running most of these runs with you?
Only during the week with the team. When I was home on the weekend, I was on my own. Interestingly, I ran some workouts with some of the Granada Hills guys. Had I gone to public school, I was in the district for Granada Hills, and they had the stud distance and track squad in the city. I'd run into those guys sometimes out in Porter Ranch, which is this big open area that haven't developed yet. They started putting platforms down for houses. And my senior year.
What time and success did you get to by the end of high school?
4:16.5 in the mile. And I had a 3:12, 5, and a distance medley relay. That was actually my junior year. So junior year was really when things lit off. I started off with the flu. I missed the first race. I struggled to start at 4:52 again, worked my way at 4:40s. And finally, in this distance medley at Glendale Relays, things came together, and I got the baton about 60 yards back, caught everybody halfway through, and caught the Burbank guy, Mark Cover, but he was a stud marathoner later on. There's this slightly bemused look on Mike Wagenbach's face, like, Mosher, really? But he was happy to see me. He got the baton. Decent position. Yeah. A couple of weeks later, I ran 4:31 against Pius 10. It was a school record, breaking a 5-year record that Judd Iverson had from 61, 4:33. And then next week, I'm doing a time trial, getting ready for Catholic League finals. And Oh my, go through the half and my foot hurts. I'll go through about 208, feeling good. And my right foot hurts. Metatarsal fracture. Out. So I had to watch all my buddies go through the CIF cycle. 8 weeks later, I was able to train again and really put in the base. And that was a motivator. And I started the senior year with a 427.9 and pretty much held the top clock in San Fernando Valley all the rest of the way through the year.
What do you know about that foot fracture? Was it accumulated training?
Yeah, it was just, I was really enthusiastic, still growing. And I just think the body said, no.
Well, how did that affect you going forward? Did you have a diagnosis that you're probably okay, that this is not going to repeat as you trained for your last year?
Yeah, the doctor told me you really need to stay off this for about 60 weeks for it to heal. You'll be fine. So I got to leave me thinking, you know what? You're going to go for 2 laps. You're going to feel the same thing and do really badly dropouts. So just deal with it and go for it next year. Yeah, it was not a career ending. It's just like one of those things. And so again, it added motivation to do really well as a senior.
What was in your psyche then, your self-image as a runner and what you were thinking post high school?
I thought I had a shot at doing some things. I was looking at going after 4 minutes in a mile and doing well in Division I NC2A athletics. First, when I got there, I got some doses of reality, but I still was able to improve. But the state mate, I only had a 418 going into it. I'd run third in our section championship. We had a really great runner by the name of Mike Solomon from Westminster. Westminster was another power. They were over on the other side of town. But when I were actually in Orange County, across the county line, they had a very good athlete by the name of Carl Trinity who ran 408 in 65 when I was a sophomore. He went on to USC, ran some miles, but basically converted to 880 yards. I think he ran a 147 or maybe 146 point.
In high school?
No, I'm sorry, this is his
Okay,
latest.
yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's later.
And Mike was a teammate of his. Mike ran 409 twice and 410 towards the end of the season in high school. He was the Southern Section champion at 409. And the way he would run a race is he'd be with the pack at 2728 and he'd drop to 62 and then 60 or 61. And of course, the rest of us are going, really? We're just struggling to make the state right before the guy looks himself back 417, 418 area of that year. So Mike was state champ in 67 when I was there in the final. And so the 416 I ran in the trial had a really good race against a fellow by the name of Thorne Bigley who had run 410 in the San Diego section the week before. And the tactical thing, he ran 415 right at the end. I took off with a lap to go and he passed me going down the old stretch. So I had a lot of confidence going into the final the next day. And I found out that after the training, I couldn't really come back the next day. And see, Gordon was second at 413. Lloyd Aptar, who'd run behind him section final. San Diego was also 415. And then there were a couple of guys at 417. I was 4-1. Just out of gas after that first half.
You remember the places and the times pretty precisely from 60 years ago.
And thanks. And I got a lot of those.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. What kind of student were you? What was the post high school path you were going to go? And how did running factor into that?
My sophomore year, I was in the 3.9, 4-point range, grade wise, overall with all of my classes. And they booted me up into the honors section, which would be trying to think the term of today, but
AP, yeah.
AP, there you go, advanced program. And again, grade average came down a little bit, 3.4, 3.5 range, but with more interesting classes, Craig, calculus. That was the first class my senior year. A big tall guy by the name of the Benignus thing got into track final. I think he passed me. But anyways, I took the test for Navy ROTC. I successfully auditioned for a spot, and you were in a pool, so I could have gone to UCLA, USC, Stanford, or Berkeley. And I lucked out. I got my choice UCLA because I'd always been a fan of the Bruins, track team, basketball team, football. I just thought that was my team.
And they were just starting their long run of basketball championships around then. Huh?
Paulie wasn't very old when I think when I got there, it was only 2 or 3 years that it stood out. Matter of fact, Navy and Army ROTC occupied the south wing of the old gymnasium where Wooden started the program. And you're right across from the student union, you're looking at Paulie and the athletic field between what became Drake Stadium and Paulie was a lot bigger. We used to start our home cross country races on that field. At the time I started there as a freshman in 67, Trotter Track, which had been there forever, the old Berg surface across from between Student Union and Paulie Pavilion was still there. That's what we trained and raced on when we had home meets. So I got a little bit of that history. In the following fall, they started in 68, they started building what became Drake Stadium. It was called the Bruin Track Stadium for several years, and they dedicated it to Ducky Drake, who had been the track coach before Jim Bush came in 65. But Ducky was the head trainer for many years after. Wonderful guy, just wonderful person. Just take care of all the athletes.
So the way this works with ROTC, once you went into that program, you got pre-college with your commitment. Was there a smooth balance of meeting what you had to do in ROTC and being a varsity athlete? Did that jive well?
Yeah, it seemed to. The thing that was a challenge was in the summer, so you'd go for training. The summer between the freshman year and the sophomore year, you would be Hayes Grant underway on one of our uncle's big gray yachts, the Lord and Craft. And then from the ground up, the middle summer between sophomore and junior year, you were with the aviation Navy for 3 weeks out in Texas, and then back at Coronado with the Amphibs and up to Pendleton with the Marines and Super Landing. So I was able to get a few basically 35, 40-mile weeks after the daily activities that we're involved with. So when I came back from cross country in 69, I had something to work with. I didn't run 68 cross country or 70 because I came back too late. Really good group of runners. That was the only downside. Of course, in your commission, you're going to be underway someplace, even if you're in the aviation Navy.
Were you picked as a leadership type?
Yes.
And was that just made sense to you at that point at age 18, 19?
Yeah, it did. I was looking at the Navy for a career at that point. And I was still balancing track with that, joining a fraternity, becoming a Theta Chi, and all the social activities there. I was busy.
Let's talk about UCLA. Did you meet John Wooden? Did you see the some of the national stars of the basketball team? And then what happened with your career competing at UCLA?
Yeah, you couldn't not meet John Wooden. The athletic administration building, 2 stories, squared off the there, was just east of Paulie Pavilion. Really not small. And of course, the basketball team was the locker room just across from us in Paulie's. You would run into those guys. So Jim Bush was the coach. At the time I was a freshman, Ken Shannon was his assistant. And Jim was a very capable man. He had what you call command presence. I met him my senior year. My dad and I went down to watch the UCLA meet. When I was a senior, I'd run a 4.3 miles at that point. And so Jim Bush is standing there, sport coat, tie, slacks, sharp dresser. Back in the day, that's on his haircut. Very impressive man. I walk up and introduce myself, my time, asked him scholarships available. He smiled and says, "Hey, that's an excellent time." We just gave our last distance scholarship to a guy that won 417. Who became it was obviously a teammate of mine later, Joe Blasco from the high. Bush was really incredible administrator, great retreater. I think his strengths were sprints, obviously quarter mile, because he developed a lot of top quarter milers, intermediate hurdles, field. Ken Shannon handled the field for him, so broke the responsibilities up. Jim did the distance riders. I ran freshman year. This is before freshman year allowed to run varsity. I ran my sophomore year and my junior year. Yeah. My times moved down. My junior year, I'd run 8:52.6 for 2 miles. I had a 9:20 at an all-comers meet the summer before starting UCLA. Only the third time I'd run it. I ran a 4:07 against the Trojans when it counted, got second in the dual meet 70. But I had been expected to be a little closer to 4 than I was. I think there was just a little bit of a loss of trust between Jim and me. And I had started training with the Striders during the fall. It was similar to a program that I'd been on in summer meets back in high school. So again, going back a little ways, Los Angeles City had a series of all-comers meets. The championship was always held at Pierce College. And that was the meet I always went to. They held the weekly meets at Gardena, East LA College, Venice High, other sides of town. There's a gentleman by the name of Pat Connolly, who was volunteer LA police officer. He later started at the academy and became a 25-year veteran. He had an immense influence on a lot of the kids in San Fernando Valley, organization called the Encino Track Club that you belong to. He was coached by Pete Petersons, who took a lot of the former SCF, took a lot of his program from Mike Igloy, Holly Igloy. Igloy had a tremendous influence on our track, on training, distance training. I was exposed to this in high school, and I incorporated some of my workouts. I went back to that, fast forwarding, and I started training with Pete, who was the head coach from Southern California Striders. Coach Bush always liked to run a 2-mile time trial at the end of cross country to see where everybody was. When the first week of December, 70, I trained some with the team on long runs, and I trained with the Striders a bit. And I just took this thing out in 4:25. And I still have a 4-second margin at the end over the next, I ran 8:56. I'm trying to get under 8:50.
That's the outfit. 4:25, 4-second lead.
And ended up running 8:56. And 4 seconds had a Ruben Chapins, who was starting to close a little bit. Ruben had transferred from Cerritos College. He was one of the top junior college runners. It had been one of the top high school runners. But Jim and I had a discussion about training methods, and I turned my kid in and trained with the Striders my senior year. Had a very successful season, I thought, more consistent. My junior year had been up and down. 1 week, great race. Next week, it's that Mosher is stunt double, high school. I ended up getting down to 4:47 at Modesto after a little bit of a journey, starting off with a 4:08 and it all covers me at Santa Barbara. And I had a 3 flat .7 relay. This is the big San Diego relays in April. 4:65. May 1st at San Jose. This is a race where Arnie Polheim, Norway, and former Oregon runner ran 3:58. And I was just behind Chuck Benz and George Skunk, Super Gross ran 4. But the 404 race at Modesto was a really interesting way it developed. I got out of the middle of the pack, came through about 58 and change. Jim Crawford, former Army College, now running for the Army, was leading, and then Dave Bailey, Canada, their top. He was their record holder in the first and fourth. He was in there. Keith Munson of Oregon State, Dennis Savage, Santa Barbara DA, the consistent 4:1, 4:2 miler. We came through just under 2.5. And this is on the old dirt track. It's evening, so it's been well used by this point, the inside lane. We're coming up on the 3/4. Keith Munson goes for it. I tuck in behind him. We come through on 3:02. And about 30 yards past that, I'm feeling all this pressure back here because I'm not using the field. This is going to explode pretty soon. So I take off. I'm just running all out. I get to almost the last turn. And Jerome Howe, Kansas State, was a 1:46 half miler and run low 4s in the mile. He comes by. and Jim's chasing Crawford. And then Bailey goes by, and in the middle is Curve. Munson goes by. Savage catches me at the top. By this time, the arms, I'm carrying weights, vision's graying out a little bit the last 50 yards. And my teammate, Bob Messina, would run for state. He was NASDAQ. We sparred. State was always our first dual meet back then. And they always had good distance runners. Bob goes by. Then right on at the end, Larry Rose of Oklahoma State. But when I found out what I'd run, I was pretty pleased. It was a nice drop. Unfortunately, I hadn't been able to pop something close to 60 or under for the last lap. But Howe won the race in 3:59. Crawford was 4 flat 0.4. Bailey was right on his heels 4 flat 7. Munson 4:1. Savage 4:2. And then Messina was 4:2.6. And I think Rose is 4:3 and change. But
Pretty packed.
that was about
Finish, yeah.
it was a good field. I think everybody that was in there had been under 4:10 for the season. I believe there were 12, 13 athletes that lined up at least. And I beat my nemesis from SC, Rich Carr. He was right behind me.
East Coast. You mentioned Canada, Oklahoma. Were there athletes from the East Coast you're aware of or competing against? How far afield did you go to race, and who else did you encounter?
Pretty much West Coast.
Yeah.
We never ventured to Drake or Kansas, Penn relays. That was a long distance. The UCLA athletic department was typically tight-fisted with dollars, especially where track team is concerned, cross country. And of course, we always appreciated the revenue that basketball and football drove up. I think we got a little bit of that. But yeah, all my competition was pretty much West Coast. I went to 77 National Cross Country at Buffalo Body in Houston. And then I think I ran Falmouth when Reebok had me out there, and I was a tech rep and still competing a little bit. So they entered me in the race. I was doing a tour of the facilities. This is back in August of 82, and Reebok was in this little warehouse with an office in Hingham outside of Boston. I got to run Falmouth. That's really about my only across the country experience.
Yeah. Let's talk about the early 70s, 72 with the Olympics coming up. Big kind of psychological boot, another big boost for America, like 64 with some medals, but 72 was a breakthrough year for middle distance in the U.S. And you were heading into the Navy. So what's going on there with your version yourself, politics, your vision, the nation's ending war, you're in the Navy, the Olympic success? What's all going on then for you in that early part of the 70s?
My last, race of any note was as a newly minted ensign. I'd been commissioned the day before on June 15th. They were already running some events down at UC Irvine for the Inter-Service Track and Field Championships. Top 3 in each event go to the Conseil International du Sport Militaire decision made. International military meet in Finland. And the 15 Laird, well, was Juris Solutions, who was national champion a couple of weeks later in the 880. He was in the race. My old buddy Jim Crawford, who I'd sparred with several times in the season. Bill Schaebrun, who had been a standout for Occidental. He was a 4.2, 4.3 miler. And then Ken Hall. I'm trying to remember where Ken came from, but he was like a 4.06, 4.07 miler. So it's tight little field, but everybody had good times. And I ran fourth in 3:48. Ken was just climbing 3:49. Crawford got Lucian's right at the end. Schaebrun was third. Crawford 3:43, Lucian's 3:44, Bill was 3:45. That was my last race of any note. I went up to the Nationals, but had just a disappointing race in the trial heat when I probably could have notched my time down. Top 6 places, led by Marty Corey, 4 flat, last guy 4-1. That's how tight that race. Crawford was in that race. Savage was in that race. A lot of the guys I've run against. So I was off to flight training. I qualified for naval flight officer training. My right eye had a little astigmatism. I really liked the aviation Navy. I didn't want to give that up. So I thought if I qualify as a navigator, radar intercept officer, maybe a fly back speed, which was unrealistic. I spent about a year in that program. It's about halfway through. This is in 72. So I'm watching everything happen. I'm running a little bit. I ran a couple road races with my Navy buddy, Phil Camp, Strider teammate also. Was in the Florida relays in the mile, got myself into that and found out what reality was. So I'm watching all this from a distance. Yeah, 72, just as an observer. Obviously, Frank Shortridge breakthrough in the marathon, put us on the map in that event. He ran very well in 10,000, although he did get a medal. It was disappointing to see Prefontaine get nipped at the end, but still, we had a presence. I think, of course, Juan was 800 meters. What a fantastic race. And we had a presence in the 1500. It was really sad to see what happened to Jim Mosher, because I think he was, I would say, still is the top American miler in my mind. I ran against him as a sophomore. It's just a tactical race. And I run against not so great 2 mile up at Eugene, cold, rainy weather. But Ryan getting tripped, and it wasn't his fault. He was fouled. And I thought they should have put him in the semis. But it was a strange Olympics in some ways, just taking what happened to the Israeli athletes. That was horrible. But you look at our basketball team, they kept giving the Russians more time.
The thing I always remembered was the extra day that Viren had to rest because they delayed the Olympics for a day. And you can make up all kind of reasons, but that seemed like that could certainly have been a significant thing. You experienced it having your first time back-to-back full speed miles. It can take your out of legs. And Viren was a machine, but still an extra day rest is a big deal.
Yeah, it sure is. Not taking away anything. I did it.
Yeah.
Looking at that era, I was about halfway through radar intercept officer training out of NES Glenvis in Brunswick, Georgia, up by Chuck Lyle, Sea Island. We were already in 72. We had been pulling out for a long time. Yeah, I'm back at the BOQ in Pensacola, another 500 miles back the freeway, riding out the officer preference card, destroyer, fly-suit, patrol boat. It's done with planes. And the detailer, one of several, lieutenant type, who's signing all the little butterbar incidents like, "Oh, you've been around planes a lot. You know what? I've got this great job at the USS Enterprise, the biggest carrier in the entire United States Navy for an assistant aviation fuels officer. You're elected. Up to Lakehurst, New Jersey for 6 weeks for aviation fuels training. And then every bar and restaurant, Tom's River and Lakehurst has a picture of the humanity on the dirigible, outside the dirigible hangar at Lakehurst in 36, right? And that's actually where all the aviation schools were. So aircraft handling, chemicals, resting gear, fuels, all little buildings inside that big dirigible hangar that had been built for our Zeppelins, right? So then joined the Enterprise in Hong Kong, and then running strikes 12 hours a day, go 3 days, noon to midnight, and then 3 days, midnight to noon, to mess up their circadian rhythms.
I've been on an aircraft carrier for a few weeks, Med, the Saratoga, and I was able to run when I was on the ship. I was pretty restricted. And when activities are, when operations are going on, things are activity. What were you able to do for fitness?
Maybe 3 miles on the deck before I lost interest. And of course, you're always looking, you've got the arresting wires, you've got chalked aircraft, and you're always watching your footing. It's difficult to run a tempo workout. I really got so busy, Matthew, that it devolved to being up and alert for flight deck and hangar deck activities. So training's a lot of fun. We'd go into Fort like in Subic Bay, Cube Point. Of course, it's very warm there. And I get a few miles in. So I wasn't totally out of shape. Competitive form was hard to maintain. I eventually got orders to a destroyer on Long Beach, but I went to propulsion engineering school June to September of 1970. But I was able during school to get my training back up somewhat. And then the destroyer, the Hollister, Naval War II ship, had just gone Naval Reserve Force with 4 other ships at the Lowell at Long Beach. She went into an overhaul. So I'm presented with this opportunity to train again. I get back to the apartment in Long Beach, and fell not sure and I'd be able to get some miles in. I gradually started getting up to about 70 miles a week, started competing. And I ran the local 11th Naval District race and went to the All West Navy Championships up in Whidbey Island. But 75, I actually ran a fairly consistent track season. Started off 913 2-mile, 420-mile wins at Glendale College, all covers me. And then it started to get a little bit more interested in traffic heavier as I got into the better meets. And eventually ended up running a 408.3 and winning the San Diego Relays Mile, beginning of April. I beat a couple of Toads, Tom Lux, and Dave Harper, but in college standouts at Oregon and Washington, respectively.
We're picking it up after a little break with a kind of disaster at my house, back with Jim Mosher. Jim, we were talking about the San Diego Relays, and you're still under 410. You ran a 4.8 mile. How old were you then, and what was going on after that race?
I was 25 years old, and I was just in the beginning phase of my tour's main propulsion assistant or assistant engineer on the house. So we were in the yards, so I could train. And had a pretty decent season, ran another 4.8.1 at Mount Sac, but I got stuffed by Dave Badaraki, who ran a 4.02.9, and some other guys. Mount Sac Invitational. And Dave was really coming on then. His coach was Laszlo Tabari, who coached a lot of guys from San Fernando Valley, famous Hungarian runner, third man under 4. And so that was Dave's breakout season. I competed in a few other meets, had a little brush with Matt Centrowitz in the 1,500 meters at Bakersfield. I actually took the race out, and he took off with about a lap to go, and he ran 3:44.6. I was 3:50.5, and there was a Taiwanese student running for Redlands. It was just in front of me at 3:49. I ended up going to the Inter-Service Championships, running against Dennis Fikes and Jim Kramer, the Marine Corps. They both ran like 3:42, 3:43. So I ran not so well 3:53. That's my track season. I ran some road and cross country races. We got out of the yards in October of 75, and then we were at sea off and on until I left the ship in October of 76. Reported to USS Jason, the repair ship in San Diego as the operations officer. And whenever we weren't underway, I was blessed in all 3 ships. I had an opportunity to get out and keep the muscle memory going. And towards the end of my tour on Jason, I realized that Navy wasn't what I wanted to do long term. I still had a strong interest in running. August of 78, I got out of the service and I took this road trip up to the Northwest. I won the Red Brick Road half marathon in Redmond, east of Seattle, 107.58 over a hilly course. Bill Shore AC. He was living on the West Coast at that time.
I know Bill Scholl really well from hashing.
Oh, great. Yeah.
I see him at least once a year, and I go down to the shore for a Rumson Hash House Harrier weekend.
Awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, say hello for me.
I will. I'll talk to him later today.
I broke away from the pack at about 4 or 5 miles, but he hung on me and was coming back a little bit. I think if he'd had another mile, it might have been interesting. I think he ended up running like a 2:14 marathon eventually.
He did, and he set the Philadelphia marathon record that stood for about 30 years.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah. They changed the course a little bit and it got broken. It was up till 2-3 years ago. They still hadn't broken his record. Yeah, he has some great stories of running up in the mountains and in the woods there, training in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. The following year, I'm casting about for something to do when I grow up. I started working part-time at Bob Day's Fidipides Running Center in San Diego. Bob was the mile record holder at UCLA forever, 3:56.4 until John Rankin broke it, I think 2004 with a 3:55. But Bob's a great guy, 68 Olympian, 5,000 meters. I worked off and on there, worked at Nolta Business Systems selling copiers for a while, worked for an aircraft tool manufacturer, but still was in touch with the store. So 79 highlights, Beta Breakers, ran pretty well, 13th, 38-37 behind Bob Hodge, who came out from Greater Boston, took it 36:50, broke Paul Geiss's record that year. Of course, by that time, that event was pretty much a moving block party. Once you had to get clear of the first mile from people feeding in.
Yeah.
But I ended up PRing in the 10,000. Again, this is going longer than I'm really used to. 30:29 in November at Mission Bay. I think Kirk Pfeffer won that thing in 29 and change, if I'm not mistaken. Babaraki was in the mix too. I think Gary Tuttle.
Did you ever have inquiries about getting an agent and getting sponsored into some of these races?
We're coming up to that.
Okay. Cree Kelly was the agent for Kirk Pfeffer.
Yeah.
In that time out of Colorado. Yeah.
So I ran for San Diego Track Club for a while and switched to Phidippides Track Club in 70. Moving into 1980, I got back into track and opened the season with a 413. It was a negative split, 214, 159. And so I got excited a little bit, started racing some 1500s. I think that's about one of only 3 or 4 miles that I ran since 80, because it was all 1500 at this point. Ran a Nike Road Championship 10K at Mission Bay early April. Herb Lindsay won that in 28:27, and Shorter was right behind him at 29:40, I believe. Matt Center went 29:50 and 28:50 and change, and was third in that race. So it was deep field. I was 40th at 30:32. I did good in front of Ed Mendoza and Dave Harper, who were probably not in top shape at that time, but they suited up and showed up. So anyway.
Yeah.
I ran my PR in a half marathon at 107:04 in Coronado, July 4th. I was sixth, first 30-year-old. And Tom Hunt set another record in that, 63:07. And Lori Binder won the women's race. So I think she was around 73 or 74 minutes back then, which was smoking at that time. Going into the end of 80, I got a wild hair and jumped into a marathon. My training had been 75, 80 weeks, probably more like 70 to 75. And it went up to 80 and a little over when I started adding on to my Sunday runs. That should be enough to run a marathon, right? It was an interesting experience. I was fourth at 20 miles an hour, 50 minutes, 14 seconds. And I was 34th at the finish, 2:34:56. So you're doing that. It was a hard stop. That last 3 miles was probably a death march. So I spent about 4 to 6 weeks recovering from that deep tissue stuff, and then started running track again. I was working for Minolta Businesses, and I somehow wandered into this production at Coronado Playhouse of Stalag 17. Probably remember the Otto Preminger movie with William Holden and Peter Graves. I auditioned to play the camp commandant because I thought, yeah, I'm in the military. I can fake a pretty good German accent, but they cast me as Price. This Peter Graves. It was fun. We had a lot of fun with this. So here I'm working full time. I'm trying to run a track season, and I'm doing this totally oblique thing on the stage. And we did pretty well with that. We got some nice reviews for it as a team. Anyway, highlight of that season, I had a couple of 351, 352, 1500, 348 at Mount Sac. But I was really at the back of the pack with that thing. Andy Clifford, former Cal runner, ran 342:19. Dan Aldridge, sub-4, was right on him at the same time. Castro of Mexico, I think, was third at 343. Mark Luevino, former Bruin, 343 and change. And then Ray Wixell of Reebok, 344. Paul Cummings was in there, Tom Dutz, Brian Russell, another Notre Dame high grad, and also former Bruin 342, 1500 guy. That race. Road racing didn't go so well the rest of the year, got some injuries, had to take it easy for a while, rest and recoup. Along the way, because of my association at Phidippides, there were some guys from a little agency called Fast Company that covered the West Coast, and they had sub-4, they had moving comfort, and they had this little race rag shoe line called Reebok in the bags that retailers weren't particularly interested in. Swoosh, Three Stripes, ASICS, Tiger, New Balance, Converse, go down the list, Brooks. A lot of people in front of the pack in the U.S., although Reebok, 1895, first ever track spike. They cut a pretty high profile in the UK, and they're pretty big on the continent. The guys in the agency got me hooked up with Reebok as a tech rep. And I did sub-4 moving comfort store counts for them. So I worked into the rep business over the next seveal years. Funny, in recap UCLA, I think I mentioned that Jim Bush and I had a falling out. And every once in a while, we'd encounter each other at an airport going to a meet. And so it's, and so I'm running some 1500 meter again at Mount Sac in April of 82. And I'm just walking up into the stands, and there's Jim sitting with the Bruins. And he looks at me and smiles, and I smiled and says, "Hey, Jim, I hope you're not still mad at me." I said, "Oh, Coach, I hope you're not mad at me." And he said, "Never." Sat down, we had this great conversation for about half an hour, got caught back up. Nice. And I got invited back to a couple of they would run a couple of alumni races or put alumni in races in the dual meet. And I got to get run over by the kids a couple of times. As I got more involved with Reebok and the business, running became more recreational. Also in 82, I met my wife-to-be, Sharon, and she was in the process of setting up the Children's Museum in San Diego. A mutual friend of ours had tried to introduce us a couple of times. We're going, maybe not from our perspective. He mentioned to her that there's this group of guys that meets at Balboa at the Veterans Gymnasium over by the Air Museum in San Diego. We meet every Friday about noon. A lot of guys there have a lot of experience running races and things. As a matter of fact, when I was with San Diego Track Club, I had been a race director and a long distance chairman for a year. Here she is in a business suit, handing out her card. She was doing this kids 5K fun run at a Mission Bay. So I said, sure, I'll help you out. That's how I became a volunteer for life.
So, you have crossed paths with everybody up and down the West Coast and people from across the country. You mentioned a lot of names. How well did you know some of the names that are really top of line? Centrowitz. Did you get to know these people or just see them at the meet and say hi and run off with?
Pretty much with Matt, he was in the race. My association probably was a little stronger with guys, let's say with the Toads, like Mendoza and Harper, Lux, Pfeffer, a little bit. Kirk was in Boulder a lot in Colorado. I didn't get to know him so well, but a lot of the Toads I got to know pretty well. And
when was the sport seeming to you to really come into women entering the sport and accelerating their participation and at the elite level in the U.S.?
1975, when I had my brief season there in the middle of my Navy experience, there were a lot of women beginning to compete in track and field, and they put a lot more events in. Also in the longer distances, road races, cross country, you were starting to see that occur. Certainly by the time I got out of the service in my first few years in San Diego, women's running was really coming on strong. It's good to see. So I guess I'm running it from a male perspective because that's how I grew up, and it's good that you bring that up. I think Mary Decker was what? How old was she in 71?
Yeah, low teens.
Because she and Ruth Wasaki, and I remember Asuma. She was a sister to two Asuma brothers that went to Riverside. Doreen. They were big in the youth running that early 70s. So
yeah,
you were starting to see that develop back then. Yeah.
You'll be out in a few weeks. I'm publishing 2 episodes with Ruth starting tomorrow. She has great stories of her early days. She was with Tabori. She ran on the inside of the track in bare feet on the grass. A lot of the time it was a whole different era. The track clubs they really made it possible for a lot of people to expand their horizons. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Jacqueline Hansen, San Fernando Valley Track Club, I think she was starting to set world records.
She said she broke the marathon twice and first under 2. She's a great person. Yeah. Very cool. Apart from being a rep and going to the stores, how were you getting supported as an athlete?
Oh, I got shoes, a little expense money once in a while. For a time, I coordinated the Reebok Racing Club on the West Coast. I worked a little bit with Jim Van Dyne and Angel Martinez initially. And then as I got more involved repping, they got better organized with that. So we had a Reebok Racing Club on the East Coast that Ed Lucier ran. I did my part here on the West Coast. As I got more involved as an account rep and then a key account rep, then Navy and Marine Corps exchange became part of my territory on the West Coast. Mostly in Southern California, to be flying up to Bay Area, Seattle.
Yeah, this is a fascinating part of the history of the sport to talk about what was the position of Reebok. When you got there, you're saying they were almost a second thought to most people. They weren't on the headline pages.
Yeah.
And do you remember their ambitions?
Paul Fireman, he had some stores, I believe, in the Massachusetts area, in Boston area. And he saw Reebok. He thought there was an opportunity there with the name of the company. You could look in track and field news going back to 60s and 70s, and you could find ads for Reebok. You trace your pattern of your foot, like with New Balance, and send it off. They make shoe for you. And good old Bolton in Lancashire. And he was a pretty driven guy. And I do remember some intense between him and the head reps. I actually expressed the opinion one time that you guys are a necessary evil. Thanks, Paul. He was the guy that took the risk, brought the line over. And so they were focused on running. And then somebody got the bright idea for an aerobic shoe. As the running boom was starting to taper a little bit, aerobics and fitness, which later developed into cross training, that was becoming important. And our shoe designer, Steve Liggett, worked on the idea. I think he and Angel Martinez worked on that. And they came up with this beautiful, elegant little white garment leathered upper aerobic shoe. I think the company made 40,000 of these things. We did a lot of seating, grassroots seating with aerobic studios and instructors. And in 3 months, they were all gone. And we were behind making that shoe for probably 4 years, Matthew. In that time, we iterated into a men's fitness shoe, the ExaFit, workout. But more importantly, we got into tennis, Phase 1, Club C, which when you look at their retro line today, those are still classics. The thing that was cool, they were performance shoes, but they looked really cool with your jeans or your casual slacks or whatever you're wearing, right? Obviously good on the aerobic studio floor and tennis court. And then basketball, by 86, we had gone past Nike. And the running shoes were always decent. I don't think they ever had any really bad shoes. It's just like when you're trying to break into that shoe wall in the retailers, and speaking from a ground, platoon company level type of thing, it was difficult. But it was nice to be able to walk in and say, "Oh, you want that so many freestyles? Okay, can you do me a favor? Can you put the Victory G up there, Vortex shoe, or can you put the GL 6000, which is one of the early Hexalite shoes?" And that's, I think, technology in the States really started to extrapolate at that point. Plus, guys like Mike Finelli, I don't know if you ever had any connection with him.
I did chat with him, just a month or two before he died.
Yeah, great guy. Anyway, kind of worked together to bring some really top talent. Get guys like Mark Conover at iStone. And of course, Steve Jones. The thing I loved after Jones won Chicago world record, I go into my running retailer. See?
Yeah, nice. The nimbleness and flexibility when you're in that position is really cool. You've had a wild, diverse career from your athletic career to your military training on ships, in the sport as an executive. Do you consider yourself a shoe dog? Did you seem to get in and try to master or really dig into the subject matter? Are you a shoe dog? How much did you learn about shoes, and how much did you become passionate about?
It's still in the blood. I still walk into a store and I got to look at them, right? I got to do the little. I was in sporting goods. I was with Reebok till about 1992. So they took everybody inside in 89. They paid off all the head reps. Paul finally said, "Okay, we're done here. I've got enough blue chip guys." And he offered to people in the field if they'd like to come in. So they offered us a pretty nice package. But as corporations do, they marched along and things changed with the program and the numbers that you had to hit. I always maintained my numbers, which I think was frustrating to my regional because he was looking at me, but we did not get along too well. About 2009, I retired off the road, went to work in a friend's men's store in San Marcos because during the 80s, I developed this little program of getting involved into competitive rifle shooting. So I did a lot of that civilian marksmanship program stuff and are in and out of that. Not as good as I was in running by any means, but it was fun.
Let's review your life passage. Still a runner, always a runner, but not able to perform. What were you getting out of competition? Your best times are behind you. You can still race, compete, and enjoy it. But how did you look at those passages of competition, your view of competition changing, your view of yourself as competitive and maybe results oriented change in running over those years?
First of all, I was glad I had the opportunity to compete and that I got to a level where I was competing against some guys that ultimately were Olympic caliber people. I got to see some pretty good track meets up close. I think realization started to set in about 1982, 83 that, I'm 30 something, I'm still running 348, 1500. And the world had changed. I had been involved with other things that kind of broke my stride, if you will. Even after things started to tail off, I would enjoy doing like a road relay with the guys, like our Hetzer group. The sales group had a lot of top level collegiate guys. Some of us were younger and closer to our performances than guys like me, but we could throw together a pretty good relay squad. We got fifth up at Tahoe in the 72-mile relay up there in 85. You jump into something like wharf to wharf. That same year, I was still, I ran 2904, 50-some placing. So that's just a realization that things have changed. And it was recreational. I enjoyed it. Always, to me, it was just fun to run. And I think when I discovered that I could do it in my youth, I just set a trend for the next 20 years and beyond. So I did fitness running well into the 2000s. And then about 5-6 years ago, the knees and other joints just started to say, maybe not. And before that, I'd started riding with some guys. And it's funny, it was a riding group called the Dead Runners Riding Club. And most of us were former competitors at one level or another. And just a fun group to be around. You take a long 50-mile bike ride. Of course, that's short for a lot of people, but for a Sunday gathering, the main thing was to get at the other end of the ride to this French pastry shop. And of course, you burn off coming back. But I had a little
when did your mileage just drop off the cliff? From
probably 85, 86.
Yeah.
I went from miles a week in 82 to 50 miles a week in 83. And then from that point, 50 miles is a big deal. And you're working full time, you're on the road. The point of emphasis is just different at that point. I realized that the real through competitive phase was done, and I was just in it to enjoy it. I did have a 412 at the Nick Carter Invitational in May at UC Santa Barbara in 83. So I had a couple of 354, 55, 1500s in that 412. So it's like the last little hurrah for the track stuff.
Were you aware of Masters track? If you'd have gone to some Masters championships, some of these were really top times.
Yeah. I think I just probably lost some flexibility. I didn't pay attention to a lot of that. I did come back when I turned 40 in 89. So I tried a couple of 5Ks. And it's 16 minutes something. But these guys are running 15 and change. Okay. These dudes are quick. This is work. This is like what it used to be. And I guess at that point, it just had some aches and pains trying to adjust to it and just was not, I suppose the interest wasn't there anymore to push it that hard. But yeah, Masters is really something.
What about the sport today? You're looking at it as a still an interested fan compared to your heyday.
I think one thing that certainly helped is that when track broke away and became the U.S. Track and Field Congress, getting away from the AAU, because there's a lot of contention there, late 60s and 70s. The leadership could travel in style. Athletes go into the athletes' village, and don't you even dare take any expense money from a shoe sponsor. You know who the guys were: Kano, Ryan, Adidas, shoe ad. There's the Tokyo 64. That's Jim from his frame. It was absolutely ridiculous. Back then, once you were done in college, it was really a challenge because married, have families, have or real-time jobs, and finding the time and the energy to keep that rolling was a challenge. The thing that changed in the late 70s going into the mid 80s was that it was finally possible for an athlete to make a little money to support himself. Prize money started coming in. I think that helped. And you go now to the junior levels and forward, people that show talent and ability are able to monetize that. And I think that helps provide a base of support. Obviously, there's this institutional memory that's built upon itself for the last 40 to 50 years, and even before that. And so I think training methods are better, nutrition's better. This whole discussion about shoes, I think that's really interesting. Like, gosh, if somebody came up with an elixir, I could go back 50 years, what it was 50 years ago, and put on one of those shoes and just see if that really does take 4 to 8 seconds off my mile. I don't know.
4 to 8 seconds off your time. That's a big threshold to cross. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I have to admit that was a disappointment not popping under. And there were some opportunities. I was in some races where that was possible. And for one reason or another, it didn't. But certainly I think the technology, it does help. Whether it takes 4 to 8 seconds, I don't know. They claim that the spikes are that good. And it's, I think, more an issue with the road racing than it is track. But
yeah, for sure. There's been a recent discussion. There's some big road miles coming up, and somebody just cracked the road mile record. And they're saying the difference, the shoes worn in a road mile or track mile seem to be 1 to 2 seconds per lap. Yeah. And if we just say, hey, what you used to run was equivalent to running on the road mile today with good shoes, yeah, there's your 4 to 8 seconds.
Yeah. It's a really interesting subject that comes up all the time with all the runners that I'm in communication with in social media. It's been fun, Matthew. Yeah, thanks.
It's great to meet you, Jim, and talk about the West Coast. I had a little East Coast career for just a bit, and then I went overseas, so I wasn't plugged into it. We could probably do this for more hours. It's so fun talking to you. But thank you for your time, Jim.
I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Running in the 70s. Voices, stories, and memories of athletes who were running in the 70s. Until next time, wherever you are, keep looking forward and don't forget to look back.